One of the most important ideas for Mahayana Buddhism comes out of the Lotus Sutra. So we want to go back over it, just to be clear about how it opens up new ideas about what Buddhist practices are or can be. But it also suggests something about um, the nature of reality or truth, and even more than that, the nature of language and the failure of language to be able to capture the truth of the universe. Okay, so as you may recall, the Lotus Sutra tells a parable of the burning house. Okay, so it tells a story that helps us better understand these teachings. It's attributed to the Buddha, as we see that it uses the name for the Buddha Tathagata. But it's a practice that really develops later and is not important for Theravada, but is important for understanding Mahayana and Tibetan Buddhisms. So the main thing we want to come out understanding is the idea of a skillful means or a skillful method. Both are good translations of the phrase that's used here. So the parable describes a burning house. A father is able to exit, but his children don't leave. When he asks them to run out to save them, and he tells them that the house is on fire, they just keep playing. So then he thinks, I'll use a skillful means. I'll call the children out to me by telling them that I have toys here. So the children run out, of course, they love toys. And he doesn't have all the toys that he promised, but he does have toys for them. And so then the place where we really want to look is over here in the second column, where we have this question from the Buddha. Did that man lie to his children by first promising them 3 vehicles and then later giving them only great vehicles, the best vehicles? And his student says, no, not at all. There is no reason to think that in this case the man was a liar, because he was using skillful means in order to cause his children to come out of the burning house, and because of this he gave them the gift of life. Even if the man had not given them a single cart or toy, he would still not have been a liar. So why is he not a liar, right? Part of the question is that he saves them, and he does basically do what he said he was going to do, but by giving them toys. But the idea of language here, the idea of what constitutes even a truth or a lie, is actually a much deeper question just than the question whether or not he has toys for them when they run out of the house. Because as really the story wants to indicate, that when we think again to the Four Noble Truths about the idea that all of life is suffering, what the Lotus Sutra suggests is that people are suffering and they really don't even think that they're suffering. They don't even understand that this world is suffering. There are things that they think will make them feel better, but actually the Buddha says that they're going to make people feel worse, right? So it's a parable to tell a way of thinking about the obligations of bodhisattvas. In class, we didn't really get a chance to talk about bodhisattvas. So bodhisattvas are people who are on the path to enlightenment. Okay, they commit themselves. Generally, the word bodhisattva can be used for monks and nuns, but the idea of Mahayana opening up to the laity that we discussed is also a big change in thinking about who can be a bodhisattva. That for Theravada it would only be monks and nuns, especially monks, but For Mahayana and for Tibetan Buddhism, everyone is on the path to enlightenment. And it's important to then meet them where they are in terms of understanding enlightenment, that some people are farther along the path than others. So skillful means suggests that any teacher can use any method with their student to get them farther down on the path toward enlightenment. And that can mean perhaps at first telling them things that we might consider half-truths. I think that to see a skillful means as in this kind of way, if it's both half-truth and half a lie, then there is this kind of question, is it a lie? But what the Lotus Sutra more fully and Mahayana Buddhism more fully really teaches is that language, verbal communication, can't capture the real truth of the universe. We can try to describe it, but it's always just kind of scratching towards the real truth that really can't be put into words. And so if that's true, then language is always just a tool. It's a tool to try to get closer to a truth, but it can never actually 100% represent the truth itself. So our choice would be between, okay, we're not going to use this tool at all, language, or we can use it. And the reality is that everything we say is always not quite right or not 100% perfect. But it does move us on the path toward enlightenment. So anything that moves people on the path toward enlightenment is acceptable, and that's what a skillful means is. And it also then underscores the obligations of bodhisattvas in Mahayana Buddhism, that in Theravada, for example, that people are on a path of enlightenment all by themselves. They might live as monks in a community, but ultimately they're responsible for their own enlightenment and for their own enlightenment only. Whereas what Mahayana wants to do with ideas like the Lotus Sutra, with ideas like the doctrine of three bodies, that these are all ways of getting at the sense that everyone on the path to enlightenment, on the one hand, can be helped by others, and on the other hand, must help those behind them, must help bring them along toward enlightenment. Okay, so two examples just really quickly that you could think of for skillful means, right? That in Zen, the characteristic practice is to use a koan, which are these questions, right? This question of like, what is mu? That's a question. Mu is this kind of negative particle that means there is not. So it's a question that says, what is there is not, right? So it's supposed to be hard. It's supposed to mess with your mind. And as we hear in the description of stories of both women going and working with their Zen master, that when they give verbal or logical answers, that she reprimands them, that the goal is to give, in a sense, a non-verbal answer, even if, right, paradoxically, a person uses language to do that. But to not seek to make everything perfectly logical, because basically this teaching would suggest that logic fails people, or at least the kind of logic that we're used to. So instead, one can use skillful means, which is to say that a Zen master decides what kinds of questions to give to their students. They give them questions that meet them at their sort of place of development. And then another example would be to think about the Pure Land, that Amitabha Buddha promises to create this special place from which achieving nirvana that has the ideal conditions in which there are the ideal conditions to achieve nirvana, right? That this then is a skillful means to have people concentrate really hard on Amitabha Buddha and rely on Amitabha Buddha to help them get into the Pure Land. And I think we hear a little bit of the kind of skillful means side of it, the reality that it's not so straightforward that everyone necessarily literally believes there's a place called the Pure Land, that it is also a state of mind. It's right here, or it's several million Buddha miles away, right? That it has to do with the way one arranges one's consciousness to understand really what the Pure Land is. And so by beginning by teaching that it's a place from which achieving nirvana is the best possible, that there are the best possible conditions for it. And then as people continue to speak with monks, continue to learn, continue to think about this, we also see that they reach more complicated ways of thinking about what existence is, what rebirth is, what the nature of being in a place even is. Okay, so all of these are skillful means, and we want to remember that Pure Land and Zen both share the idea of the importance of skillful means in the Lotus Sutra. That's what makes them Mahayana Buddhism. But the practices that we hear about from Pure Land Buddhism wouldn't be imported in Zen Buddhism. And then those practices of using koans, using those really difficult questions, and the relationship between a master and a student, that is very different from what we see in Pure Land, right? So those are two forms of Mahayana Buddhism, and I think it's useful to think of them as schools within Mahayana that develop as a result of new doctrines like the Lotus Sutra and the doctrine of three bodies, and that's what distinguishes Mahayana as really a new way of practicing Buddhism, as a new vehicle that is separate from Theravada.